Today, Kia has flown us out to Maryland to take a look at the all-new 2018 Rio. This is Kia's most important vehicle worldwide because this is the best-selling Kia in the world. It also happens to be Kia's best-selling model in Europe, so this has a solid European focus. Although this was obviously designed with Europe in mind, they also decided to make a Rio for America because you will find a sedan and a hatchback version of the 2018 Rio, something that we don't find in all world markets. Kia really changed the front-end look of the Rio for 2018. Now, some of the shapes are still the same because we still have the signature tiger nose grille, it's what they call this shape right here, and the headlamps are still somewhat similar to last year's. However, the previous generation Rio really had a more bubbly, rounded front end with a much shorter hood, and they decided to make this a decent amount more square. The model we're driving is the top-end EX trim, so we have fog lamps down below, and then we have a radar sensor right there in the middle because we have autonomous braking and collision warning in the top-end trim. The new front-end styling is definitely obvious from the side view because you can see that this hood is longer and definitely flatter than it was before, giving this definitely a squarer front-end appearance. We also have a rear tailgate that's a little bit more vertical than other subcompact hatchbacks. The design gives the 2018 Rio more of an overall golf-like or perhaps small crossover-like appearance. This reminds me a great deal of the Kia Rio and perhaps the Kia Sportage. In terms of overall length, the hatchback is 160 inches long, and that's the one that we're taking a look at right here, making this almost exactly the same size as a Ford Fiesta. Very much like the Ford Fiesta, there is also a sedan version of this in the United States that you won't find in Europe. In order to make the sedan, they took the same basic vehicle, they dropped the line right here a little bit, and then they give it a trunk, adding over a foot to the overall length, coming in at 172.6 inches long. Strangely enough, almost exactly the same length as a Fiesta sedan. In terms of overall styling, I would say the Rio is definitely restrained. They borrow an awful lot from their crossover lineup for the styling of this rear end area, and Kia has deliberately avoided some of the overstyled elements we see in some of the competition. In Europe, this would compete directly with the Volkswagen Polo, which I think actually has some very similar design cues, although we don't see that Volkswagen model in the US. Be sure and let me know what you think about the overall styling down there in the comment section below. I think that the hatchback is by far the most attractive form for the Rio. The sedan looks a little bit unusual for some angles, as small sedans tend to. That's not a problem that's unique to the Rio, of course, because most small sedans in this subcompact category have a few unusual shapes to them because they were trying to fit a vehicle that's only 170 inches long into the sedan format. There are about 5 different engines available in the Rio worldwide, but only one of them comes to America. It is this 1.6-liter 4-cylinder direct injection engine. Peak horsepower and peak torque actually dropped from 2017 to 2018 down to 130 horsepower and 119 pound-feet of torque, but 0 to 60 time actually improves because what Kia did was instead of focusing on a peak horsepower number or peak torque number, they really broadened the torque curve. So this engine produces more horsepower and more torque at lower, more usable RPMs than the last generation model did. The engine is mated to your choice of a 6-speed manual or a 6-speed automatic, and fuel economy averages come in at 32 miles per gallon combined for all forms of the Rio, whether you choose the manual or the automatic or the sedan or the hatchback. Depending on how you compare this to the 2017 model year Rio, that's an improvement of 1 to 3 miles per gallon. When it comes to front seat comfort, I'm going to give the Rio 9 out of 10 points. Now, it's important to remember that these seat scores are as compared to other subcompact cars, so obviously this seat is not going to be as comfortable or as adjustable as many compact sedans because you won't find a power seat in the Rio and we don't have any adjustable lumbar support. However, all models of the Rio, this EX model and the base trim as well, have quite comfortable seats. Only the top-end EX trim gets a tilt telescopic steering column, keep that in mind. Other models simply have a tilt steering column. As you'd expect from a subcompact vehicle, the rear seats are definitely more compact than something larger. However, at 6 feet tall, I still have a decent amount of headroom in this hatchback model and about 1 inch to 1.5 inches of legroom sitting right here behind myself. You will find a bit more legroom and headroom in something like Honda's Fit. In addition to having a bit more legroom and a bit more headroom, the Honda Fit allows you to use this area for cargo storage with a very unique flip-up seat bottom cushion. The rear seats fold in a 60-40 fashion, and they're a little bit higher off the ground than the rear cargo area. Cargo room is quite generous whether you get the sedan or the hatchback. Thanks to a rear suspension design very similar to what we see in the Kia Soul, you get 13.7 cubic feet in the sedan, which beats out the Yaris or the Fiesta and is just below the Nissan Versa, or 17.4 cubic feet in the hatchback version, which is more than we find in the Fit, the Yaris, or the Fiesta. In addition to the larger cargo area, the sedan and the hatchback come standard with a compact spare and enough room under the load floor for a full-size spare if you want to buy one yourself. The car I've spent most of my time in today is this EX trim hatchback with a two-tone leather interior. This is sort of a black and dark red interior with height adjustable seatbelts for the driver and the front passenger. As you'd expect from a subcompact car in America, the front doors are made from a majority of hard-touch plastics, although we do have a soft-touch armrest in this red section right here. The two-tone theme continues on over to the dashboard, where we find this 7-inch touchscreen LCD in the top-end models, a 5-inch touchscreen in the other trims. Like most subcompact vehicles, the dashboard is made from hard-touch plastics that includes the upper section, this middle red section, as well as the lower trim. The 7-inch LCD supports Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, and in an interesting twist, factory navigation is not available. They decided to leave that out in order to save money and give you this Apple CarPlay functionality. Again, keep in mind that the base 5-inch touchscreen does not get CarPlay or Android Auto integration. Below that, we find the controls for the single-zone climate control. We have a two-tiered storage area right here. There's one tier up here where you can put your smartphone across, then there's one where you can put it below. Single USB input and single 12-volt outlet. The shifter is a fairly traditional console shifter. Drive is all the way down. Manual mode is over to the left. We push away from the driver for gear up, pull towards the driver for gear down. From this angle, you can better see the two-tone leather upholstery. We have that perforated center section, red on the bolsters. Between the front seats, we have two large fixed cup holders and a handbrake. Behind that, we have a soft center armrest that opens to reveal a fairly compact storage compartment. The instrument cluster is very similar to other Kia models. We have black faces, white numbers, and a red needle right there. In the center of everything, there's a monochromatic multifunction display that gives you things like your trip computer information, as well as certain vehicle settings. Because we're in the top-end trim, we get a leather-wrapped steering wheel. We have sport grips up top, and it's sort of a three-spoke design. Again, very similar to other Kia models with this round airbag in the middle. On the left side, we find the controls for our infotainment system: volume up, down, mute, track forward, backward, mode, voice command, some dedicated phone buttons over there. And then on the right side, we have the controls for the cruise control and then that multifunction display. Fortunately, Kia had a base trim to take a look at. You'll notice that we still have the height adjustable seat belts, but we have fabric seats. They have a slightly different pattern in the center of the seat. The front doors are quite similar, but you'll notice that we have a manual crank for the window, and the armrest is not quite as large. We still have the large bottle holder below, however. The dashboard still gets the two-tone treatment, and we still have iPod media integration with this 5-inch LCD, although we don't get standard Bluetooth audio or Apple CarPlay integration. We still have the single-zone climate control below with air conditioning, and of course the same USB input. We also get the same shifter with a manual mode and a handbrake with those two large cup holders, but we don't find a center armrest between the seats. The instrument cluster is largely the same, although the multifunction display becomes a little bit more basic. The steering wheel is no longer leather-wrapped. It is a urethane steering wheel, and instead of the cruise control buttons on the right, we have a trip button and a reset button because we don't have cruise control. Keeping in mind that we haven't had a great deal of time in the Rio today, we've had about 200 miles and about 6 hours or so driving this car, this definitely feels more grown-up than the last version of the Rio. And that really seems to be Kia's mission in developing new cars. They're really aiming for a very solid, very grown-up feel to the vehicle. It kind of matches the styling on the outside, if you ask me. As far as subcompact vehicles go, this definitely has more of a European feel to it than something like the Versa or the Yaris. Compared to those two vehicles, the Rio definitely feels better put together. It feels a little bit heavier, a little bit larger, and a little bit more solid, even though it's actually right about the same size as those. Instead of saddling base Rios with an older 4-speed automatic transmission or perhaps a CVT or a smaller engine, all Rio models use exactly the same engine and exactly the same transmissions, and that means that all of them are going to go from 0 to 60 right around 9 seconds. Our 0 to 60 score in this one was 9 seconds flat, but keep in mind we're not driving this on our own home roads, so that score could change once we get it home. Our braking test ran in at 125 feet, which is pretty average for the subcompact category as well. When it comes to handling, the Rio scores very well in this category. Keep in mind there really aren't many sporty entries in the subcompact category in the United States. We don't get entries like the Volkswagen Polo, and we don't get anything from France, like the Renault or Peugeot small cars that we do find in Europe. That means that perhaps the sportiest competition to the Rio would be the Yaris IA, which is also known as the Mazda 2 in other world markets. But for the United States, Mazda and Toyota have an agreement. They make a Toyota sedan for them, and they stick a Toyota badge on the front and call it a Yaris. Now, the Yaris IA doesn't necessarily handle any better than the Rio, but it definitely has a better steering feel than this car, although the steering feel again has been improved over the previous generation of the Rio. The ride is fairly well controlled, and that's actually something that we see in a variety of subcompact vehicles, because a lot of subcompact cars versus compact cars tend to have higher profile tires, and that gives us a little bit more road cushion. Now, depending on the road surface that you drive on, you can get a little bit of bobblehead action in this vehicle like we can in any subcompact car that has a short wheelbase. But that said, the Rio has a fairly well-polished ride. The engineers at Kia admitted something that I've heard from a number of viewers out there, and that is that small cars can be a little bit tiring to drive on longer highway trips. And that's something that Kia tried to focus on with this model. They tried to give it a little bit more road isolation in terms of cabin noise, wind noise, etc. And they tried to improve the on-center feel so it's not quite as dirty, not quite as tiring out on long highways. Now, it does seem to lose just a little bit of front steering input in that process, but I think it's an overall good trade. In terms of cabin noise, we scored 72 decibels at 50 miles an hour in this hatchback version. Again, however, not on our own home turf. However, that does seem to compare very favorably with the other subcompacts in America. The automatic transmission definitely makes the most out of this small engine. As I said earlier, it actually produces a little less peak horsepower and a little less peak torque than the previous version, but this manages to go from 0 to 60 faster. And the reason for that is all about the horsepower and torque curve. This makes more horsepower and more torque at lower RPMs and for a little bit longer than that previous engine. And it is noticeable out on the road. This feels peppier, and it feels like the engine isn't working quite as hard. Of course, any vehicle in this category is going to feel like the engine is more overworked than the average entry in the compact category. So something like a Kia Forte is going to feel peppier. It's going to feel like the engine is working a little less hard. My overall impression with the Rio is that this is exactly what the British would refer to as a cheap and cheerful car. The price tag is not terribly high, and even in base versions of the EX trim, which is what we're driving, you will find a decent amount of standard equipment. Now, you should keep in mind if you start adding options to the EX trim, like the leather upholstery that is in our car, you are going to get the price tag up right into the compact segment, so do keep that in mind. The key difference between this car and a lot of the competition is that in the base trim, it feels like a more expensive car that they have taken features out of to reduce the price, rather than a cheap car having features added to it in the top end trims. And that's an important distinction, because when we take a look at cars like the Nissan Versa, it feels like a cheap car that has had more bits added to it rather than the opposite. And that's why even the base trims of the Rio use the same climate control system. We find a somewhat similar 5-inch infotainment system instead of something without a touchscreen LCD, and we still find these height adjustable seat belts. Now, admittedly, they do rip out a few other features, like we don't get Bluetooth, we don't get those power side view mirrors, etc., but I think it's an okay trade if you're looking at those base trims. It also helps the upper level trims like the EX feel more cohesive, because these bits did not have to be designed for an $11,000 price tag, which is exactly what's going on inside the Nissan Versa. Overall, I would say that this is absolutely excellent competition to the recently refreshed Honda Fit. The Honda Fit has a reputation of being a fun, practical, and reliable car, but those are now attributes that could definitely be applied to the Kia Rio. Now, this is not quite as much fun as the last generation Honda Fit, but then again, the current generation Honda Fit is not quite as fun as the last generation either. One of the big differences between this and the Honda Fit is that you find a CVT under the hood of the Fit, and you find a traditional 6-speed in this car, and the 6-speed does have a slightly better feel to it. Of course, the trade-off for that improved feel is fuel economy, because the Fit will get better fuel economy than what we've been driving right here. Kia tells us that there are two very different customers that buy the Rio, and that really shows in the way they have designed the vehicle and the way they've priced it. The first is obviously a shopper that wants an inexpensive vehicle, and that's why the Rio will start at $13,990, and that would be for the sedan with the manual transmission. If you want an automatic, that's $1,000 extra, and if you want the hatchback, the premium is $300. It's actually fairly low for a hatchback upgrade. That brings the base LX model hatch up to $15,290 with the automatic transmission. That puts the Rio less expensive than just about every entry in this category, except for the Ford Fiesta, which does end up a little bit less expensive than this. Of course, keep in mind that all Kia Rios will have Kia's 10-year, 100,000-mile powertrain warranty, and that is a pretty big addition to a vehicle in this category, because a warranty like that could be worth up to $1,000. You will find entries in the subcompact category like the Nissan Versa that advertise a very, very low base price. However, once you add an automatic transmission and the hatchback to the Versa note, it'll actually be more expensive than a Rio. And the same thing happens on the Rio sedan to the Versa sedan. The other kind of customer for the Rio is someone that wants a subcompact vehicle for its overall size, but they don't want to give up on the same kind of features that you may find in a top-end compact car. And that's where the EX trim that we've been driving this week comes in. Kia tells us that at the moment they see sales being split pretty evenly between the LX, the S trim, and this top-end EX trim. At the moment, the current 2017 EX ranges between about $18,000 or $19,000 starting. I expect the starting price on the 2018 EX to be just about the same. Kia has not announced final pricing on the S trim, the EX trim, or any of the options for the Rio. However, we will see those coming soon because this vehicle will again be on sale right around the fourth quarter of 2017. If you want to know how the Rio compares with the competition in detail, you will have to wait for our full weekly test, which we expect to happen in the coming few months. Until then, if you're shopping for one of the best values in the subcompact car segment or one of the best cars overall in the subcompact segment, definitely put this on your shopping list. And of course, if you're shopping for a Ford Fiesta or a Versa or a Versa Note or any of the Yarises, I would take this over any of those vehicles because I think it's a better car overall, and it's also a better value. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. Again, I'm Alex Dykes. This has been the 2018 Kia Rio. Be sure and subscribe to this channel with that button down there at the bottom of your page. Comment down there, let me know what you think about the 2018 Rio, and I'll see you next week.